Hello, my name is Ellie Wang, and I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Dickinson Law. I'm currently in the McLona lab for the lab's Witness to History project. We are capturing the personal experiences of women during a dynamic period in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Gale du Pont to join me. She's a minister. Thank you, Ms. du Pont, for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here.
So first, I'd like to talk about your childhood life.
Okay.
When were you born?
I was born December 29th, 1953 in Philadelphia.
Oh, so does your name have any special meaning?
Actually, that's my married name. My maiden name is Wenk, W-E-N-K.
So through our pre-interview call, I know that your father gave you a name. There are some meaning in it.
Yeah. So I was supposed to be named Michelle,
Mhm,
and I was born during a snowstorm.
mhm.
At the time there was an actress. Her name was Gail. Her name was Gail Storm, and
Oh,
it was a show called My Little Margie.
mhm.
And my dad always liked that, and so they decided since I was born during a storm, they would just call me Gail.
That's interesting, and thank you for
And
sharing.
the poor guy, he got my poor father got stuck at the hospital. He couldn't get home because the roads were closed.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a little bar and grill right across the street from the hospital, and so the bartender was kind enough to let him sleep in on the cot in the back room that they kept for people that were unable to drive home. Although he wasn't, his reason wasn't intoxication. His was that
Mm.
he couldn't get home because of the roads.
So, do you have any siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
What did your parent do for a living?
Um, my mother was an administrative assistant.
Mhm,
Um, she actually didn't work until I was in high school. She
mhm,
was a stay-at-home mom until then. So she was an administrative assistant for a steel company in our neighborhood. And then my dad worked for Sears. He was first a salesman and then a customer service representative.
mhm. Do you have a special memory from your childhood?
Oh, I have a lot of special memories from my childhood. I think one of the ones that I lived in a neighborhood that was very diverse in
Mhm,
terms of religion. Um, at the top, we lived in a row home, and it was kind of like a triangle.
mhm,
And at the top of the triangle was the synagogue, and a block away was the Catholic church.
mhm,
So all the kids in the neighbor, and it was a new development, and they were all families with young children. So everybody in the neighborhood was either Jewish or Catholic. We were like the only Protestant family.
mhm.
Um, but we had a cherry tree in the backyard. Um, and I remember um, one of my fondest memories was that my mom would get up on the ladder, and all the
Mhm.
kids in the neighborhood would bring their little buckets, and they would wait for her to bring down the cherries to fill her buckets. Um, and then they would take them home, and my grandmother lived with us. And so her specialty was cherry pie.
Wow.
So we always looked forward to, it was like early summer, when the cherries were in bloom. And we would feed the whole neighborhood.
Wow. That's so great. So you live in Philadelphia till you grew up and then moved to
Yeah,
Carlisle.
I actually I guess after my first year of college, or a first year of working after I graduated from college,
Mhm,
um, I moved to Delaware County,
mhm.
and I lived in several areas in Delaware County. And then in 1990, I moved out here to Carlisle.
Okay. Let's move on to talk about your teenage life. During what period did you go to high school?
Let's see. High school was 66 to 70.
Mm. So where did you go to high school?
It was Alney High School in Philadelphia.
How did the class in your high school look like? Was it mostly girls or boys?
Mixed.
Mixed. Were there any classes that only women took?
Probably home ec.
Oh, maybe. So were
We were
there
all required to take home ec.
so
All the
only
girls. Only the
oh,
girls were required to take home ec, and the boys took shop.
oh, so only women were required to take home make.
That's right.
Okay.
And it was mostly cooking.
Ah, so what's her like master dish at that point?
Oh, and there were simple things, but the one I remember that I really hated was Waldorf salad. Uh, it was apples with mayonnaise and walnuts and on a bed of lettuce. And I just don't like mayonnaise with fruit.
Oh.
Uh,
Okay. So what did girls wear in your high school?
um, we wore skirts.
Mhm.
We didn't have uniforms, but
Mhm.
that was still not a time when girls wore pants. So most of
Mhm.
the girls wore either dresses or skirts with, knee-high socks.
Mhm. Did you enjoy it?
I didn't mind because we didn't know any better, um,
Mhm.
in terms of, wearing pants to school.
Yeah.
Um, I was just glad we didn't have to wear a uniform like my friends that went to the Catholic school.
Mm. So you did not have a dress code. You can wear whatever you want.
Yeah, as long as the skirt had to be below your knee,
Okay.
um, and you couldn't wear short socks. You had to wear knee-high socks.
Mhm.
Um, and the boys just kind of wore anything.
So they can wear
As long
any.
as they wore pants and a shirt,
Oh.
didn't matter what.
Mhm.
Um,
So how did you feel about the difference between what boys and girls wear?
I don't think I ever really thought about it.
Mhm.
Um, you know, it was kind of just at that time that was just part of the way life was.
Mm.
Um, it probably wasn't until I got to college where, I started to uh, rebel a little more.
What did you mean, like rebel more?
um, well, once I got to college, that was like now in the early 70s. It was 70
Mhm.
to 74. And so the trend then was um, halter tops,
Mhm.
low rider bell bottom pants,
Uh-huh.
macrame belts,
Uh-huh.
and no bra.
Oh, wow, that sounds fashion.
Yes, that was during the burn the bra era.
Uh, so did you follow the trend?
I never burned it. I didn't wear one. I wore a lot of halter tops, so you really kind of
Ah,
didn't need to wear a bra.
oh.
Um, but um, I kind of, if you don't mind, I kind of want to go back to elementary school because I
Sure.
think something happened during elementary school for me. One was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
What's that?
Um, that was during the uh, when John F. Kennedy was president.
Mhm.
And so um, Cuba had missiles that they claimed they were aiming towards the United States.
Mhm.
And so we all had to have these like drills, and we would have, they would sound the disaster alarm, and we all had to hide underneath our desks.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that happened was the assassination of President Kennedy.
Mhm.
Um, and we ended up, being off of school for a couple of days so that we could watch what was going on.
Mhm.
But one of the other significant things was the integration of schools. Um, I lived in an all-white neighborhood, and in Philadelphia, there were no school buses.
Oh.
Um, you lived within a mile of school, and you
Mhm.
walked to elementary school.
Mhm.
And so when they integrated the schools, it was the Black students that came into the white schools,
Mhm.
and they had to come by public transportation.
Mhm.
So it was hard enough trying to integrate students in, but then we couldn't even socialize with students during the lunch hour because we would go home for lunch. They
Mhm.
would have to stay because it was too far for them to go home because you had an hour. It took me
Mhm.
20 minutes to walk home, 20 minutes to have lunch, and 20 minutes to walk back.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it was like I saw the inequity that was going on at that time, and just felt really bad for, the students that, they were just they couldn't go home, we couldn't socialize with them during lunch, and um, it made it even harder,
Mhm.
to get to know people and really try to integrate, you know, with the existing student body.
Mhm. So was this the very first time you kind of sense like some kind of inequity in the society?
No, because I had, seen a lot on TV with, Dr. King.
Mhm.
Um, um, and so, I had been, even though I was young in an elementary school, my parents were very big on watching the news. And so, I would see what was happening, where, students were trying to, even though there was a law that allowed them, where they weren't allowed to go to school. Um, so um, I just thought it was kind of unfair that the Black students were the ones that had to travel, um, and not, the white students. Like, we didn't go to Black schools, or schools that were in Black neighborhoods. It was, the Black students had to come to the white schools. Um,
So did you make friends with those like Black students and then
Not so much in elementary school, but when I got to high school,
Mhm.
I had friends that were, very diverse.
Mhm. Yeah. So you understood it's really hard for them during that period and then Mhm.
Yeah, and then, the assassination of Dr. King came when I was in high school. Um, and unfortunately, the school did not deal very well with it.
Mhm.
They allowed the Black students to have an assembly, but it did not go well. And we were having lunch in the cafeteria when the program was going on in the auditorium, and it was right across. And I guess there were some students that just really were very angry and upset of how it was being handled. And so they started to riot. And they came through the auditorium doors into the cafeteria. Um, and so we all had to run. And I remember running through the kitchen and jumping off, um, the the dock where they
Mhm.
would pull the trucks up to, and
Mhm.
running home. Um, and it was a couple days before they were able to settle things down in order for us to return back to school. Uh,
So for this kind of trend, like do you still remember during what period this kind of inequity were resolved by the United States or other people?
yeah, it's never really been resolved. Continues
Yes.
to be an issue, and even more today. The progress that I think we made, has in the last, well, since January especially, um, has taken a downturn very quickly.
So I just want to going back to our question. Did you join any club in your high school?
I was in French club. I was a majorette. Um, I played field hockey. Uh,
Mm.
I was in the orchestra. I played the viola.
Mhm.
Let's see what else. I think that was pretty much. Oh, and then we had like a sorority. It was called Varsity Teens. That was the girls, and Varsity 20 was the guys.
Uh-huh.
And so you had to be in one of the sports or a majorette. You had to have a certain like grade point average
Mhm.
before you were even, allowed to apply for. Uh,
Oh.
yes, and we had a very interesting initiation. It was basically you just got dumped with every kind of food substance imaginable. um, Peanut butter, chocolate sauce, marshmallow, ketchup, eggs. I think it took like 10 washings to get everything out of my hair.
Wow. So why did you choose that club?
Um, I think it was the prestige
Mhm.
of, and honestly, the boys in Varsity 20 were pretty cool because they were all football players and basketball players.
So, what do you mean, like really cool? Is because their appearance or what they
Yeah,
do?
I mean, but in high school it was like, all the girls wanted to date a football player.
So, what's your favorite subject during high school?
Oh, goodness. What was my favorite subject? Probably math.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah,
And why did you like it?
it just kind of made sense, you
Uh-huh.
know. I wasn't too crazy about geometry, but everything else. And I think it was because I didn't have a great geometry teacher.
Mhm.
But math and science were probably my, favorite subjects.
Oh.
Also liked French. I had a great French teacher.
Mhm.
Not that I
So
remember anything now, but
it's okay. So, who was your favorite teacher in high school?
oh, I can't remember her name, but she was our um advisor, a class advisor.
Oh,
Um,
so
she was young,
mhm.
very progressive,
Mhm.
um, and really treated the students, with respect and, like valued our opinion. Whereas a lot of the older teachers were like, "This is the way it is. You don't have a voice."
So, did she inspire you at like in any ways?
Well, I think she was very good at encouraging us in terms of you know, car- you know, um, career choices,
Mm.
and where we could apply for college.
Mm.
She helped me to get some scholarships that were like community based, where different organizations. Um, she submitted my name for a couple of things, and that um, I ended up getting a scholarship from. It was called the Forefathers Association, which was a local group that gave out $1,000 scholarship every year, which
Mm.
at that time covered one
Yeah,
year's
it's
tuition at Temple.
fun. So, were the teacher in your high school mostly men or mostly women?
I think there were probably more men than women, but there were a fair amount of women. Um,
So, what did those women teachers teach?
um, English,
Mhm.
languages,
Mhm.
um, phys ed, home
Mm.
ec.
Mm. And did you feel that there were some expectations for you during your teenage year?
On the part of like my parents, or
Yeah, and
uh,
from
oh
society.
yeah, the expectation was you will get good grades, you will get all
Oh,
A's.
oh
um,
wow, that's
you
so
know,
sweet.
you will be on, you will get into a good college.
Uh-huh. And was there any woman in your teenage years you look up to as a role model?
Probably my mother and my grandmothers. Um,
What's the reason?
well, all three of them were very kind and caring women,
Mhm.
very generous in terms of, anybody needed assistance, any help with anything, they were always there. And so they were really, I think one of the reasons I went into healthcare initially and then eventually went into ministry,
Mhm.
because I always learned from them that you always helped somebody that was in need.
Mhm. So you just follow
Hmm.
their step.
Yeah, and we were very a strong religious household. Um, at least my mom was, and my grandmothers.
Mhm.
Um, the men on my men fought my father and my grandfather not so much. They went because their wives dragged them.
So, did you pursue a college education after high school?
Yes. Um, Originally was interested in going into physical therapy.
Mhm.
Um, and I did get into the University of Pennsylvania.
Oh.
Um, but my dad worked on commission
Mhm.
as a salesman for Sears. And so some years were good and some years weren't.
Mhm.
Um, but averaging out, I ended up not qualifying for a scholarship, and the
Oh,
tuition at Penn was just too expensive.
yeah.
And I didn't get into the program at Temple. And so I decided to look at other options and applied for the program for occupational therapy at Temple and got accepted. And it was the best thing I did because I realized afterwards that physical therapy was not something I would have wanted to do. Um,
Mhm.
Physical therapy focuses so much on the body,
Uh-huh.
whereas occupational therapy really looks at the whole person,
Mm.
the body, mind, emotions. Um, and that's really, has been my focus of looking at the person as a whole and not just a limb. Um,
So you did the right choice for yourself.
mm,
So why did you choose to attend college?
um, that was kind of not a choice. It's like, my parents were like, "You will attend college." I was actually my generation,
Mhm.
which was myself and my um, um, mother's sister's two daughters
Mhm.
were the first to attend college.
Wow.
Um, I should take that back because my mother's brother did. He went to Temple actually and
Mm.
became an accountant. He was the first in the family to go to college. But I was the first. We were the first girls.
Wow. So do you have some special memory in Temple?
Hmm. I did live in the dorm for even though I lived very close to Temple. I lived in the dorm for a semester, and that
Mhm.
was a learning experience. Um, just being with, other girls, different personalities. There was a lot of camaraderie. You developed a lot of close friendships. But um, when I went to, I realized that when when I the first 2 years when you're in the occupational therapy or physical therapy program, you're at main campus. And
Mm.
then you transfer into the program, which is up at the health campus.
Mhm.
And it's very intense. It's like 9 to 5 every day. Um, and so I felt it was probably better for me to live at home
Mhm.
during that time, so that there were no distractions, um, because I wouldn't be able to. Yeah, it's not that easy to study when you've got, oh, we're having a party next door, let's.
Uh-huh.
So I moved home when I got into my junior year.
Mhm.
Um,
So what were your friends do after high school? Did they also attend college or?
Most of them did. Uh,
Mhm. And now I want to talk about your work life.
Okay.
What was your first job after graduating from Temple?
So I worked half-time at Hahnemann Hospital as an occupational therapist, and it was a relatively new program.
Mhm.
One of my supervisors at Temple um, had started it, and she was kind of the oversight.
Mhm.
Um, and then I worked as a consultant at a nursing home,
Mhm.
the other part-time. Um, and it was a nursing home that was for all only indigent people of color.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was the only white person.
Oh.
So I really kind of began to see what it felt like to be in the minority. Um,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because um, it was very different.
What did you mean like it's very different?
Well, I mean, it wasn't that I didn't have a lot of contact, in college and high school, with people of color, but, to be the only person that was white,
Mhm.
was very, very different. Um,
So you kind of understand how they feel when they are in the US.
yes.
Uh-huh.
Um, Although it was a wonderful environment to work in. I mean, everybody was very friendly and welcoming. That wasn't the issue. It felt strange. Um,
Mhm.
and I said, began to realize that that's, how people of color felt kind of all the time. Um, I didn't know what to expect when I started. But I was desperate to start working, so I took it. Um,
So why did you pick this job? Is it because you just graduated from university and want to work?
yeah, I had a hard time finding. Um, there weren't a lot of positions in
Mhm.
the area. A lot of my classmates were not from the Philadelphia area. So when they graduated, they went back to where they were living, Pittsburgh, Massachusetts, wherever. And the job market was a lot more open. Um, Philadelphia at the time, there were not a lot of openings.
Mhm.
Um, and I think didn't start working till September, and I graduated in May.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you know, it wasn't the ideal situation for somebody who was right out of school.
Mhm.
Um, because essentially had very little supervision.
Mhm.
Um, and when you're right out of school, you have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You learn a lot, but there's a lot you don't know. Um, and I didn't have much support. Um, the physical therapy director at the nursing home was very supportive,
Mhm.
and helped to answer a lot of my questions.
Mhm.
Um, but at the hospital, my supervisor um, from school was supposed to um, give me supervision, but she ended up getting very ill, and so I was kind of left on my own. And only last after about 6 months, I started looking because it was just uh, not the right fit.
Mhm.
Um, and then I ended up taking another position where I was just a staff person. Um, and 3 months after I started,
Mhm.
the person who um, was the director decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And
Mm.
so I ended up now only maybe a year and a half out of school, um, being a department director.
Wow.
Yeah, those first couple years were not easy.
So how do you feel about that?
Well, I didn't get any management training in college, and
Mhm.
in our program. OT was like strictly, the clinical aspects of things and, the emotional aspects of people with disabilities, but we got very few leadership skills. And so it was tough because we were expanding very quickly and I was hiring staff, but not having any idea how to deal with them.
Mhm.
And made a lot of mistakes. Just, not sure how to handle situations. And then finally, we had a new director for the entire rehab. Um, and he realized that um, two out of the three departments under him had directors who had really very little experience with leadership. And so um, he started doing some leadership training, which was very beneficial.
Yeah.
And so I ended up there. I was there like 10 years
Oh.
and expanded the department from me only
Uh-huh.
to a staff of like, I think we had like 8 or 10 staff.
Mhm.
Um, we had inpatient, outpatient, we staffed the burn unit, we did cardiac and respiratory rehab, and we also did home care.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, so were there any particular mentors who influenced your career path?
well, probably when I was in OT school,
Mhm.
um, I had gotten engaged and I
Mhm.
wanted to stay local.
Mhm.
And my advisor, I think, realized that I was really not sure about marriage and all.
Mhm.
And so she decided that she was going to send me
Mhm.
away to do my clinicals
Uh-huh.
and separate me. Um,
Intentionally.
yeah, intentionally. And I didn't have a car at the time. And she
Uh-huh.
sent me to literally the boondocks,
Uh-huh.
to Coatesville and to Elizabethtown,
Uh-huh.
where the only way home was the train
Uh-huh.
in the middle of winter. So you can tell I got home very little.
Uh-huh.
And it was probably the best experience because I realized it was like marriage was not what I wanted.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to focus on my career. Um, and um, I learned a lot
Mhm.
because I worked in environments that were very non-traditional.
Mhm.
My clinicals were in very non-traditional settings, which really helped um, when I started working
Mhm.
because I had experiences that clinically
Mhm.
that I would have never had anywhere else. Um, and yeah, unfortunately, the leadership aspect, as I mentioned, was not a good thing. But from a clinical aspect, I really got a lot of good training. Um, we really never had much in terms of mentors when I was working. Um, that second job, the speech director was a woman, and the physical therapy director was a man. Um, and though she and I were friends, we kind of supported each other because we were the only two women directors.
Mhm.
Um, but it was more supportive than mentoring. Um,
Mhm.
we really didn't have anybody that was, kind of out there on your own.
So what do you mean out there by your own? Is because you two were the only women there?
Right. That were, managers.
Mhm.
And so it was a difficult situation because, I was young.
Mhm.
I was only in I graduated from high school at 16. I graduated from college at 20.
Oh,
Um, and so, I was now a department director at 22.
wow, that's
Um,
so young.
and so, you know, I wanted to be able to, be in an environment working where, I could meet people too and have friends. And I really couldn't do that because I was in a management position.
Oh
Um,
yeah. It's,
and so, it was kind of lonely,
Mhm,
because, they were all getting out together and, going out together. And um, sometimes I went to things that, if it was like a whole department thing,
uh-huh.
um, but you had to really be careful, because there's boundaries when you're talking about, management.
Mhm,
Um, so, um, if I had to do it again, I would definitely never, be in that situation where I had a management so young. Um,
mhm. But you did not regret it because you said that it's a good training period to
mhm.
you.
Yeah,
So,
eventually, I did get, the training and the experience, and I was able to grow the department. Um, but there were a lot of rough years.
so what did you see other women doing in your community?
Well, at that point, I really didn't have much contact with the community. It was like work was it. I'd work, I'd go home. Uh,
Oh,
um, yeah, yeah, I wasn't involved in any kind of, I didn't even attend church during those years.
hmm.
So I'd like no life outside of work. Uh,
Oh. So I know you are a minister right now. So what's the reason that you change your job to be a minister?
so I had some health problems very early on. Um, and I um, got to the point where I was really unable to work.
Mhm,
Um, I was on medication that made me extremely tired. Um, and so I was probably in my early 50s and I had to take a disability retirement. Um, and so by the time new medication came out and I was able to feel well enough to go back to work, I was
mhm,
62.
mhm,
Um, and to try going physically, I couldn't do the job of an occupational therapist anymore,
mhm,
um, because it required, some lifting and transferring. Even though most of what I did, I tended to, I've most of my last years of working, I focused on work related injuries.
mhm,
Um, but we still had, to do assessments where you would be lifting weights,
mhm,
assessing people's ability to lift, and, I'd have to do a lot of lifting. Um, so I decided, retirement at that point.
mhm,
Um, and then in 2014, 2011, I joined a local church. Um, and in 2014, when um, um, the person that was representing the church on the religious council of Carlisle, um,
mhm,
decided to go back to school and couldn't attend the meetings anymore. She asked if I would be interested in doing it, knowing my kind of background, with, having grown up in a very diverse, religious community. Um, and the religious council employed the chaplain
mhm,
at both Claremont, which was at the time the county nursing home, and Cumberland County Prison. Um, and so I got to know the chaplain at the nursing home through that. And um, at that point was an assisting minister at the church. which is basically a lay position. You help with communion and reading the prayers and everything. And I also started doing home communion, visiting people and, doing communion. And so the chaplain knew that, and he approached me and he said, I have a space available on a Sunday to do a worship service at the nursing home. And he's like, I know that, you're assisting and doing home communion. And I'm like, that's a big difference from that and designing a worship service and doing a sermon. We're talking about, apples and oranges here. But I sat down with the pastor and I said, this is what they're asking me to do. And he's like, you can do that. He said, you know. So I started, it was it was the fifth Sunday of the month. I would do a worship service at the nursing home. And then one of the people that did monthly had to leave because of health reasons. So he said, do you want to do a monthly one? And I'm like, okay, fine. And then I really started to enjoy what I was doing. So I went back and I had gone between going to seminary, but I was involved in a lot of community things at the time. And so I really didn't want to give all that up. And so I decided to just become a certified lay minister and do more community-based things than be a pastor in a church.
So how did you feel when you just come back to the workplace again?
Well, it was easy because I was able to make my own schedule. It wasn't like I had a 9-to-5 job that, I had to be at. And most of it for the first number of years I did as a volunteer. I was doing one Sunday a month at Claremont. And then the church that I belonged to, one of the members was a resident at one of the other nursing facilities. And she found I was doing a service there. And so she said, well, why aren't you doing a service here? So then I started doing that. And then I ran for our denomination's synod council. That's their administrative branch. And I lost because nobody knew who I was. But the person who was in charge of the elections saw my skills and invited me to be part of the Synod's Towards Racial Justice task force. And through that, I made a lot of connections. And I ended up actually co-chairing the task force. And it was around that time where my co-chair, who was one of the assistants to the bishop, was looking to start this ministry called Release Faith, which focused on people that were marginalized, people from the LGBTQ community, people that were in nursing homes, prison, survivors of trauma, domestic violence, human trafficking. And so I started working for them doing expanding the nursing homes, starting to do groups for women in prison, and then working with survivors of domestic violence. Because one of the things, I had been a survivor myself and found that especially contemplative prayer and spiritual practices were one of the things that really helped me. I had gone through counseling, I had gone through medication, and I still had a lot of anxiety. And I found that really worked. And so I figured if it worked for me, I needed to share that with other people, with other women and see, so that's kind of how I got to where I am now. I took a lot of training in, I have 2 preaching certificates, one in missional preaching, one in trauma-informed care. Took a lot of courses in, faith-based trauma care, pastoral care. So now I lead services in 3 different nursing homes. I have a group at the prison that's kind of a spiritual direction group, a contemplative prayer group. And then I'm seeing some people individually for just pastoral care. Some in the nursing home that are, end of life, others that in the prison that have been sexually abused, exploited, who are not comfortable talking to the chaplain who happens to be a male. And most of the volunteers coming into the prison that lead groups are also men. That was one of the things I found, that women were very neglected on the faith side in prison. Everything seems to be directed to men, and very little for women.
So does your church also try to promote women's status in the US or in Carlisle?
Well, the Lutheran denomination has, I think this has been like our 25th anniversary. It was last year of ordaining women. And 10 years of ordaining the LGBTQ community as pastors. So Lutherans we're pretty progressive, at least the ELCA Lutherans. And we try through our justice ministries to recognize, each month, if it's Hispanic or, Women's Month or whatever, to try to recognize those and provide resources for churches to utilize so they can, honor those groups and, lift them up. Unfortunately, our church populations are not very diverse. We're probably one of the whitest denominations. And I think some of that is that we're not very good at change. We kind of expect people to come into our space and accept the way we do things instead of, adapting so that we're more welcoming to people that are more diverse. And that's why I like what I do, is because I can create it however I want, and I don't have to stick to the rules.
So as a minister, have you ever encountered a situation at work that was challenging?
A lot. I'm dealing with a lot of people who are at the end of their life. A lot of people who have been, abused and neglected and abandoned, exploited. And it's very challenging listening to the stories and trying to help them, to recognize that they still have value, and they're loved and cared for, because they've never experienced that. And so it's very tough. I think one of the things and challenges it, and not just being a minister, but even as an occupational therapist, the medical profession is very strongly men. And so trying to be valued and respected as a woman in healthcare, especially back when I first started, was very difficult, was very challenging. We really didn't have a voice. I was like one of maybe 6 or 7 out of like maybe 50 department directors that was a woman. And so we were always pushed aside in terms of our voices. And it's the same thing in ministry. I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of women, but it's still a very patriarchal society. Very old white men, especially in the Lutheran denomination. And when I took several of the 2 preaching courses I took, they were geared to people that had been ordained. And our director of evangelical ministry knew me very well. And he's like, I don't have a problem with you taking this. He said, I think you'll do really well. He said, this will really help you in what you're doing. But I got a lot of flack, and it was mostly from the men. Like I didn't belong there because I wasn't an ordained pastor. Um, whereas the women were a lot more supportive of my being there, and provided me with a lot of resources that helped. And I'm now taking a contemplative prayer program that's for clergy. And I was let in as a layperson because I'd taken a number of courses through this particular group. And that was one of my biggest fears, was I was going to have the same experience. And fortunately, it has not been that way. And in fact, the facilitators did a lot of changing the wording of things so that it took out like ordained or pastor or clergy, and made it more general, and took it out of the context of the church and like the faith community. And so they were, because it was interesting, that was one of the questions that was on the application. What has your previous experience been with faith-based education? So I was like very fortunate that I have good facilitators that are in tune to that.
So I'd also like to talk with you about your family life.
Okay.
When did you get married?
Mm,
Or during what?
1983.
Did you feel pressure to get married?
No, I was 29. So I really did not have a lot of interest in getting married. My focus was on my career. Um, and this just, it was just one of those things that happened.
So were others around you getting married?
Definitely. Um, um, People that worked for me,
Uh-huh.
um, that were younger than me were, getting married. I attended a lot of weddings. Um, I really lost track with most of the friends that I had in high school.
Uh-huh.
Never really kept in touch with them. So I had no idea what they were doing. Actually, I do know now that a number of them never got married. So I thought it was interesting. Um, but yeah.
So do you have any children?
No.
How's your married life look?
What? Say that again?
How's your married life look like?
Well, I got a divorce in, let's see, 1990. And I would probably never do it again.
So if you don't mind me asking, what's the reason you got divorced?
I married someone that was extremely abusive.
What did you mean like extremely abusive?
Physically and emotionally abusive.
So how did you feel after your ex-husband did that?
Well, it started very early on. Um, we were just back from our honeymoon when the first incident happened. Um, and so it was one of those things that, you know, I was newly married. I wanted to, you know, save the relationship. And so I would leave for a couple days after the incidents and then come back. And he had a drug and alcohol problem. Um, and so when he would drink, he would get violent. And so, you know, I tried to convince him to get help, and it was one of those things, I'll get help if you come back. No, I won't get help until I won't come back until you get help. And so we
Mhm.
were at a standstill. Um, and I tried for, you know, quite a while.
Mhm.
And then it got to the point where my parents were, you know, getting phone calls in the middle of the night. Um, and they finally said to me, you either need to, you need to make a choice. You know, you need to either decide that um, you're going to live in this situation. And if you are, we don't want to hear about it because we can't take it anymore. Um, and so I decided that it was time to leave. And it wasn't long after that that he filed for divorce.
Mhm.
Um, um, but it was a very difficult situation because I felt like I had failed. Um, um,
So
and I
when
realized all the signs that I missed
Mhm.
when we were dating. Um, you know,
You
they
mean,
say love is blind, and they ain't kidding.
yeah. So what did you do after your ex-husband filed a divorce?
We ended up finally getting a divorce.
Mhm.
He made it very difficult. Even though he filed, I by that time I had moved out here, um, because he was basically um, intimidating me. I'd come home and things in my house. I had moved out. I'd actually had a townhouse before we got married, which I kept. Um, and one of the reasons was that the market at the time was just not good for selling, and so I just decided to keep it and I rented it out, and so I had a place to go because it just happened to be, you know, nobody was living in it at the time. Um, and I'd come home and would have been moved around and doors and drawers would be opened, and so I knew somebody had been in the house.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and he'd had a key at one point. Um, when we were dating. So I figured, you know, somebody was getting in. Um, and so eventually I moved out here to try to get away from the situation. Um, so I had to go back for hearings you know, and he wouldn't show up. So nothing got done. And that went on for like 2 years. Um, where I take off a day from work, I drive all the way down to Philadelphia. I get there and he wouldn't show up. And finally, I said, you know, enough is enough. Um, he had a lot of political clout. He knew a lot of people. He was very wealthy. And so I went to the courthouse and I said, either get me a judge and you get this thing heard and settled, or I'm going to the newspaper. And
Mhm.
so I ended up getting a judge who was retiring, who didn't care one way or the other
Mm.
because he wasn't concerned about his political future because he
Uh,
was retiring. Um, and it turned out he still didn't show up for the final thing. He sent his attorney, um, and we got everything settled. And it was like, thank you. I'm away from this situation. And then a couple of years later, he ended up murdering someone
oh,
and going to prison.
it's a really tough story, but what do you think you grew from the relationship?
I think you know, I learned more of how to really look at a relationship in terms of, you know, what really is a healthy relationship. And it wasn't that I didn't have that growing up. I mean, my parents were, they were, when my mom died, my parents were married 60 years. Um, but I think it was that kind of caring spirit of, thinking I could change somebody. And I realized that people don't change unless they want to change. But there's nothing you're going to do that's going to change them.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I think that's the one important lesson I learned, and from future relationships, is that this person is the way they are, and they're not going to change unless they want to, and you're not going to do anything to affect that.
Yeah.
And even in with what I do, people that come to me, they have to want to change their life around, and because otherwise, I can talk all I want, but it's not going to make a difference.
How did you take care of yourself after the events that happened in your life?
Well, during the like immediately after I left, um, and I had some fairly serious injuries. I had a jaw that was dislocated. I had a head injury. Um, and so I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of headaches, a lot of, GI kinds of things that you see from stress and anxiety. And I had a hard time believing that this was just anxiety, because I felt I was stronger than that. So I don't know how I went through all kinds of tests, because I was like, this has to be physical. Um, and everything came back and said, they're perfectly fine. I was still dealing with some, posterior headaches, because I had my head hit against a very hard surface. And, was having a lot of jaw issues. So I was still in a lot of pain physically. But it was the emotional aspects of it. I went to a group at Domestic Violence Services. I had individual counseling. I was on medication. And as I said, it wasn't until I reconnected with the church and started doing some spiritual practices that I kind of really found some inner peace, that I was able to be more centered and focused, and that really helped with my anxiety. And through all of that, I had a lot of other health issues that had nothing to do with that just kind of exaggerated the anxiety. So, and then after the murder, that first week was like a nightmare, because people realized that he had an ex-wife, and so everybody and their grandmother wanted to know, and I had people camped on my doorstep from newspapers and television and radio and magazines and you name it, and people calling me. It was like I couldn't even get out my door to go to work. People were following me. And so my attorney said to me, he said, the only way you're going to deal with this, he said, is to just give somebody an interview. He said, because once it's out there, he said, then it's done. He said, because everybody wants the story. He said, and once you tell the story to somebody, he said, everybody else will go away. And sure enough, that's what happened. And so I decided to, it was, if you're familiar with Cynthia McFadden, she's was one of the legal reporters for NBC. She interviewed me, and that was kind of the end of anybody bothering me. Every once in a while, somebody will decide to write a book There was a movie made. There's been a number of things on, I guess it's Investigative Discovery Channel of, murder in by the 1%. Somebody made a documentary not too many years ago. And so every once in a while I get phone calls and, would you be interested in talking about this? And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm done. I shared my story. You can find it elsewhere. Um, but yeah, it was difficult. One of the things moving out here is the name was not anything that was recognizable. DuPont was not a name out here that anybody really knew anything about. And so for the longest time, nobody had any idea. And then I started volunteering for domestic violence services. And people knew my story and they convinced me that I needed to share it.
Yeah.
Which was not easy.
Yeah, it's really tough. And I think a lot of women still like experience this kind of stories in their lifetime. So thank you for sharing your story with me.
Yeah, and I think it's helped me because I can identify with a lot of the women that I work with. And not to say they're learning from my experience, but it is different when you've had that experience.
Yes.
It's the same thing with, one of the reasons that recovery specialists are people who are in recovery,
Yeah.
is because it's easier to identify and relate when you've had lived experience, as opposed to, somebody who's trying to tell you how to do something and has no idea what it's like.
Yeah. Totally agree with that.
So, yeah.
So we started our interview with me describing you as a minister. How would you describe yourself?
Oh, how would I describe myself? I would say that, I am a very caring, um, very loyal,
Mhm.
um, compassionate. Um, I'm a good listener.
Yeah.
Uh, and I will go above and beyond for people that I care about.
And
That may not just be family and friends, that may be people that I'm working with. Um,
so looking back on all that you've experienced and achieved, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
hmm. I think that I got through a lot of challenges, um, especially very early on of being in positions that were kind of way above my knowledge capabilities, but I managed to get through it.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot from it. I learned, especially confidence, um, and learned a lot about, that I did have the skills,
Mhm.
and not to doubt myself. Um, and also, I think I learned a lot of where my strengths were and where my weaknesses were. Um, yeah, it's funny because I was kind of a wild child,
Mhm.
like as a young, right, kind of out of school and
Mhm.
working. And um, I guess it's been about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I was at a interfaith service in Harrisburg. It
Mhm.
happened to be at one of the Jewish temples.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a little reception after the service, and I ran into two people that I used to work with.
Mhm.
One was a physical therapist, one was a speech pathologist. And so they're like, well, what are you doing now? And I'm like, I'm a minister. And they just laughed. And they were like, oh, you're serious. I guess I never had that, you know, vibe that, that was something that, that I would do. But it was funny because I was like, look at how people perceive you. Um, and yet others, as I later on, I had the opposite reaction. People thought I was like very straight-laced.
Mhm.
Um, and I think some of that was that I had to be because I was living, I was working in a man's world. And so you kind of, in order to survive, you had to put out that emotional side and all, and you had to be very, professional and very, kind of, I hate to use the word straight laced, but, just kind of
Uh-huh.
like, it- you know, giving off that very professional vibe.
Mhm.
And, people didn't think I had a fun side to me. And I've had, different things where they have icebreakers and people will say, what's something about you that nobody knows? I'm like, I'm really a fun person.
I can tell. I can tell.
I'm like, I'm really not a stick in the mud. I'm really a fun person.
So, as we close our interview, thank you for sharing your story with me and our audience. It was a pleasure to hear your story, and I'm excited about the impact your story will have.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you, Miss
appreciate
Yu.
this, the opportunity.